1967 for Palestine and Israel living side by side. These are two issues. While the US administration still clings to a two-state solution, we know that is not the policy of the current government in Israel of Benjamin Netanyahu. Also, the US is the main weapons supplier, as we know, to Israel, and green-lighted fast about $750 million in upscale weapons, including missiles. That has been noted around the world and criticized by quite a few countries. China, of course, which holds the rotating presidency of the Security Council this month, did release what it could be a statement, as agreed to by other powers, which essentially asked the US to step up and stop blocking things at the United Nations. Remember, the US government has said that human rights would be a centerpiece of its foreign policy, and it's getting more and more criticism from around the world. Now, on the word of ceasefire, we know that the US has an emissary in the region, but negotiating essentially in Ramallah, where the Palestinian Authority are, not with Hamas, because they consider it a terrorist organization. The European Union are involved, France is involved, Egypt. They did have connections to the Muslim Brotherhood, which is, of course, Hamas is an offshoot, but it's a different government now. We also have the United Arab Emirates, Qataris involved, but it does seem that a ceasefire is a long way off. And if we look at previous wars between Israel and Gaza and Hamas and Gaza, they have gone on a long time with mounting casualties. But this time, I can tell you, within the Democratic Party, within Washington, with the American public, there is a very different feeling. That the Palestinians here are definitely suffering far more than the Israelis, and there is more and more pressure here in the US for something to happen to stop the violence. Nathan King, CGTN, Washington.
Well, staying with this story, China has slammed the US over a potential arms sale to Israel. This comes as international calls for a stop to the hostilities grow. Here's a statement now from the Chinese Foreign Ministry.
Most of the UN Security Council members have called for an immediate ceasefire to prevent a full-blown crisis. They have called for the protection of civilians and putting an end to the rising casualties. They insist on a political solution, urging both sides to resume peace talks on the basis of the two-state solution. They also think that all Security Council members should have a unanimous voice over this issue and proceed in a fair manner. The process aims to promote the peaceful coexistence of Palestine and Israel. But the US has not only failed to act to stop the conflict, but also has even prepared to add fuel to the fire.
Right, let's turn our attention now to the France-Africa summit. France says it is in favor of cancelling almost $5 billion of debt owed by Sudan as part of efforts to help the country in its transition to democracy. The announcement came at a summit in Paris where heads of state, investors and activists gathered to discuss, among other things, Sudan's ongoing transition to democracy. Ross Cullen reports.
Sudan is seeking relief on at least $50 billion of external debt. It's already secured bridge loans from the United States and the United Kingdom, and it now has further aid from France, which is Sudan's second biggest bilateral creditor after Kuwait. Sudan's economy was crippled for decades by sanctions imposed on former President Omar al-Bashir and his government.
As far as France is concerned, I want to tell you right now, Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, we are in favour of a pure and simple cancellation of Sudan's debt, of cancelling almost $5 billion. That is the meaning of our support for your transition. And it's the meaning of our commitment to the youth of Sudan who made your revolution.
The summit that was hosted by the French leader convened voices from across Sudanese society, as well as Sudan's neighbours like Egypt and Ethiopia, along with international organisations to try to spur investment in the country and aid its transition. Now, that political transition got underway after a popular uprising saw the military overthrow al-Bashir, who'd been president for 30 years. Sudan's Prime Minister hailed his country's return to the international community after 3 decades of isolation.
Today, with your leadership and generous support on this, we are able to create this last hurdle, which would signal the return of Sudan to the development community. And this is where we will be able to create the jobs that will respond to the aspiration of the young people.
The conference also heard from Sudanese youth, climate and feminist activists. Many of them participated in the 2019 protests, which focused initially against rising living costs, but quickly widened into demands for the removal of President Bashir and his government. Sudan is currently being led by a joint civilian-military council as it moves towards democracy, with elections set to take place by 2022. Omar al-Bashir came to power in 1989 in a military coup, and he was ousted the same way in 2019. He could still face trial on charges of war crimes and genocide at the International Criminal Court. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
Now, France is hosting several African leaders in Paris for a summit to discuss ways of providing financial support to help relaunch African economies after the COVID-19 pandemic. French President Emmanuel Macron is calling it a New Deal for Africa, and invited to the conference are the leaders of more than a dozen African countries and representatives, including from the World Bank, the IMF and the Paris Club. Macron is proposing debt relief for both public and private entities hit hardest by the COVID-19 pandemic, as he hosts creditors and debtors to discuss ways of providing funding to certain sectors of the African economy. Well, let's bring you more now on what African nations can expect from the France-Africa Finance Summit. And for this discussion, let's bring in Edwin Okoria, the Executive Director for Africa at the One Campaign. Thank you so much. Of course, he's joining us via Zoom from Abuja. Thank you so much for your time, Edwin. Positive news for Sudan coming out of this summit so far with regards to debt cancellation. But what else do you think African leaders will be asking for or expecting from today's meeting?
Thank you for having me. I think one of the biggest expectations from this meeting is the continued conversation on the SDRs, or the special drawing rights allocation that has been agreed by the IMF and other world global leaders during the last World Bank spring meetings. What we expect is that there will be continued momentum around that, so that at least no stone will be left unturned to ensure that those SDRs, or the special drawing rights, are actually allocated. But more importantly, really, because $650 billion worth of SDRs has been agreed, but of that, only a paltry 30 billion will be coming to the whole of Africa. And so the expectation is that during this summit, there will be major conversation about how the rich countries, who are going to get almost $280 billion worth of SDRs, will recycle their own SDRs for other poorer countries to be able to get back on track in terms of economic recovery. Of course, you know that African countries have a current financing gap, as estimated by the World Bank and the IMF, of over $345 billion between now and 2023. And so this conference should be bringing a pathway for how Africa can get that kind of financing to help its recovery from the pandemic.
Indeed, and of course, those finance gaps have been exposed even more so by the pandemic. But it's not only state coffers that have suffered. We know that private businesses across the continent really felt the pain of this pandemic and suffered severely. So how do private businesses get their voices heard at this summit level? And how do they benefit from any finance relief that may emerge from these meetings?
Thank you. I think that is a big question. But of course, each country has its own mechanism of developing the financing framework for relief for countries that are, for businesses that have been most affected, particularly the number of jobs that have been lost because private sector businesses couldn't survive during the course of the pandemic. It is time for African countries to begin to think about the most direct framework of financing those sectors, particularly sectors that have been hit hardest, like tourism, like the air transport business, right? Those ones have been really hit. Hotels are closed down. Many hotels are closed down because of low patronage. So this is the time where, if they get the lease of life, if they get the financial relief that this conference could discuss, and the money becomes available at the country level, then each country is responsible for protecting jobs in the economy, because the economic fallout and the hardship that will come if private sectors don't get this funding, it's really going to be very tough. And that's why the expectation is that as the monies become available, as the funds become available from SDRs or from debt relief, right, the private sector, the businesses particularly who have been hit hardest, would be prioritized so that at least jobs can be protected. But more as well, as much as jobs, is also how do we get to the end of the pandemic, like things like vaccines, things like education, because without all of this as well, the pandemic will stay longer, and then the economic hardship will continue to go on for a long time, which will affect private businesses more.
And that may well be the true test for this summit, whether or not this debt relief trickles down to ordinary citizens. Thank you so much, Edwin Okoria, joining us there via Zoom from Abuja. Now, as we know, African economies have been hit hard by COVID-19, and they are now pinning their hopes on progress at this France-Africa summit. The African Union says about 20 million jobs have been lost on the continent since the outbreak of COVID-19. Our correspondent Tesem Akende reports from Nigeria.
Kenneth Sunji has been selling animal feed for 7 years, but has lost almost everything during the pandemic. He is just one out of many businesses that have suffered as a result of disruptions caused by COVID-19.
COVID-19 affected us in such a way that business was brought to almost ground zero. Many farms folded up, which also affected our output. Output was reduced to a large extent. We were unable to meet up our production capacity, and at some point we were unable to pay our staff because of the downturn in revenue generated from the business. We had to rely on our family and friends since we applied for loans but we didn't get any. So some good willing people came and assisted us, and we are paying them back gradually. And they also gave us non-interest loans, which we are still paying back. That's why we are still in business.
Many on the continent are hoping for good news as leaders gather for the France-Africa Summit to discuss how to provide support to countries in Africa hit by COVID-19. France is proposing economic assistance which includes reallocating IMF special drawing rights worth up to $58 billion, debt relief, and debt cancellation for the countries most affected.
Most African countries were seriously affected by the COVID and by economic crisis following the COVID. Some have not recovered up to now. Many countries are still grappling with serious economic issues. So I believe that the summit will provide an opportunity for African governments to discuss with France. France has been a major player in African economic development for quite a while, especially sub-Saharan Africa, and has, through its AFD, which is the French Development Agency, they've been working with several African countries in terms of providing assistance and providing support in many areas.
Economic experts say heads of African governments must ensure any new resources to emerge from the summit are allocated appropriately.
It is a grants issue that sometimes gets abused, mainly in some African countries. We know that many grants sometimes get misapplied, and so to prevent that from happening, there must be what's called a robust monitoring and evaluation system. There must be a robust project management system in place. There must be also a good integrity in terms of management of the funds. Staffing issues, staff who are supposed to manage these funds must be qualified. Not only that, there must be people who have high integrity, and there must be people who are committed to the project.
In 2020, the African Union adopted the use of digital COVID-19 travel certificates to ensure safer cross-border travel in a bid to boost economic activity.
The World Health Organization says Africa accounts for the lowest number of officially reported deaths due to COVID-19, but has been the worst hit economically since the outbreak of the disease. The France summit is expected to encourage diversification of the economies, many of which rely on single products for exports. The summit will also look at ways to support private sector businesses struggling to get financing amidst the downturn.
And with such support, many whose businesses that are battling to survive like Kenneth Sundays are hoping for stability again. Tesem Akende, CGTN Jos, Nigeria.
International Criminal Court Chief Prosecutor Fatou Bensouda has urged the Libyan government of national unity to take urgent steps to put an end to crimes committed in detention centers. Bensouda, while briefing the UN Security Council on the Libyan situation, called on Libya to fully investigate allegations of arbitrary detention, torture, confiscation of property, rape and other forms of sexual violence. Bensouda, whose term ends on the 15th of June, has underscored the unwillingness of Libya to transfer suspects to the court, saying it has contributed to a climate of impunity. Time now for a short break, still ahead on the program. A South African hospital celebrating a surgical milestone after the separation of a rare set of conjoined twins. Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories. Let's have a look. We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis,
Syria, Juba, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. We start in India now, where 127 people are missing off the country's west coast. This after a barge drifted into the sea and sank during Cyclone Tauktae. 146 people have been rescued. The Indian Navy says the vessel sank about 100 kilometers off the coast of Mumbai this morning. Bad weather is complicating search operations. The most powerful storm in more than 2 decades made landfall in Gujarat state on Monday with wind speeds of up to 190 kilometers per hour. It had already caused widespread damage further south of India as it moved up the coast. The storm has killed at least 16 people and caused more than 200,000 to evacuate from their homes. In South Africa, the Red Cross War Memorial Children's Hospital is celebrating their latest surgical milestone, the separation of a rare set of conjoined twin girls. The twins, Siposetu and Amahle Kalisi, were born attached at the head. Renee Delcam has the story.
The twins' 31-year-old mother, Ntombi Kayisi Tialisi, said she was expecting to give birth to just one child and was shocked and frightened when she discovered that she had had craniopagus twins, conjoined twins that are joined at the head. The rarest form of conjoined twinning, which experts say occurs once in every 2.5 million live births worldwide.
And we were fortunate in this case that the connection didn't involve shared brain tissue and didn't involve major vessels going from one twin to the other. So, of course, we planned the surgery very carefully.
About half of all craniopagus twins are stillborn, and another 25 to 30% of them do not survive to the point of being separated. Surgeons expected to perform a marathon 6-hour-long separation operation on the nearly 1-month-old baby girls, but it lasted just 1.5 hours, which was a major plus for the twins' recovery.
We were able to cover both baby scalps with their own tissue. So in terms of soft tissue cover, they won't need any further operations at the moment. So that went very well. And I feel very happy. I feel very happy for the mother.
I'm happy now that my twins have been separated, because when they were still joined, it wasn't easy for me to hold them, and it was difficult to bathe them. The nurses had to help me. Now that they've been separated, things are going to be much easier, and my sister back home will help me take care of them.
Although we've done conjoined twins at Red Cross here in Cape Town for quite a number of years, this is one of those really rare occasions where we get really excited when it really works out. So yeah, thank you to everybody involved, and we're really proud of you.
The twins are not expected to have any serious cosmetic or developmental problems, but the Red Cross Hospital medical team will continue monitoring them to determine if they'll need further surgeries in future.
All right, anyway, it's good on my side.
And their mom says she's just happy that she can now hold one of her twin daughters, little Sipho Setu and Amahle, in each of her arms. Renad Al-Kam, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
A new COVID-19 vaccination center has opened in Tunis, increasing the total of in the capital to 6. The Tunisian health minister said this new center could receive up to 2,000 people a day and speed up the country's vaccination campaign. Our correspondent Adnan Chouachi reports.
The COVID-19 task force has revealed that many older adults do not use email and struggle to sign up for vaccines online. The mayor of Tunis said the health department has relied on text messaging to reach thousands of citizens.
2,000 people were informed via SMS about their vaccination. Organizing this operation in one day is very challenging. Our role is to provide modern, spacious and safe environments to protect the medical staff and the people who are getting vaccinated.
As hundreds of people waited in line to get vaccinated, the Director of Public Health Services has urged patients to arrive at the doors 10 minutes before their scheduled appointment.
I call on all registered people to respect the schedule and come on time. Each vaccination does not last more than 30 minutes, and it's useless to come too early or late. Respecting the rule will help us to reach our target of vaccinating the whole population.
Tunisia's COVID-19 vaccine campaign is being rolled out in 5 stages. Medics, paramedics, as well as security forces and the military were the first to get the jabs. Now the ongoing operation targets people aged over 65 and those with health conditions.
This center is close to my home. I was reluctant to get vaccinated, then I understood that it's necessary. I'm retired and living with chronic illnesses. The vaccine saves lives. All Tunisians must get vaccinated.
The number of people who have been administered a vaccine is less than 600,000. 800,000 doses were delivered to Tunisia by mid-May. 510,000 additional doses will be purchased by the end of this month. Tunisia has 54 vaccination centers across its 24 regions. More centers will open throughout the country. Health authorities also plan to distribute vaccines in pharmacies to speed up the vaccination campaign. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Elsewhere, Zimbabwe has received 100,000 doses of the Sinopharm COVID-19 vaccine. It is the third donation of Chinese vaccines received in Zimbabwe since February. Monday's consignment to the Zimbabwe Defense Forces was donated by the Chinese People's Liberation Army. It also includes 420,000 syringes. Zimbabwean Minister of Defense Opa Muchinguri Kashiri says the gesture is a show of solidarity between the two militaries. So far, more than 500,000 Zimbabweans have received their first vaccine doses. Over 200,000 others have been fully vaccinated.
This is another important action of our joint efforts to fight against the pandemic. This donation is the third of its kind between our two countries in the short span of 3 months, starting from February. A follow-up to the PPEs donated last year to our brothers in uniform. It comes despite the fact that the pandemic is still lurking on China's doorstep, and domestic demand for vaccines remains enormous.
We are delighted to note the latest development where the World Health Organization listed the Sinopharm vaccine for emergency use on the 7th of May 2021, giving the green light for the vaccine to be rolled out globally. This development puts paid previous negative social media sentiments about the vaccine and their proponents. Despite such numerous negativities, Zimbabwe has maintained its confidence in the vaccine based on its faith and trust in Chinese vaccine innovations.
At least 5,000 migrants have crossed from Morocco into the Spanish enclave of Ceuta. They include thousands of miners. Now, according to Spanish authorities, many swam or walked across at low tide, while others traveled using rubber boats. The migrants are being hosted at a holding center. Spain has accused Moroccan authorities of doing nothing about the influx of migrants. Over 200 Spanish security officers are now being sent to Ceuta as reinforcements. The influx of arrivals comes at a time when Rabat and Madrid are at loggerheads over the disputed Western Sahara territory. Morocco has accused Spain of hosting the leader of the secessionist Polisario Front, Brahim Ghali, who is reportedly receiving coronavirus treatment in Madrid. The Democratic Republic of Congo marked its 24th Liberation Day anniversary with calls for unity amid an ongoing onslaught against rebel groups in the east of the country. The day is marked to remember the coup that brought Laurent Désiré Kabila to power in 1997. Chris Ochamringa has more from Kinshasa.
A solemn occasion in Kinshasa. Congolese officials hold prayers to mark the country's 24th Liberation Day anniversary. Back in 1997, a rebel movement called the Alliance of Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Congo seized power from then-President Mobutu Sese Seko. The group, led by Laurent Désiré Kabila, was supported by troops from neighboring Rwanda, Uganda and Burundi.
Date du 17 mai est une date importantissime.
The 17th of May is a very important date in the political history of our country. It marked the end of the dictatorship that we went through during the reign of President Mobutu Sese Seko. The revolution was led by Laurent Désiré Kabila. We now need to be united and end the conflict in the east.
President Laurent Kabila changed the country's name from Zaire to the Democratic Republic of Congo after taking office in 1997. Critics say he abused his power, but many Congolese citizens regard him as a hero.
Mitsi Kabila came to liberate the population from the internal dictatorship and the external influence of foreigners seeking to loot our minerals. For 32 years, our government was serving the interests of the French, Americans, and Belgians. We Congolese citizens were neglected until Laurent Kabila came.
The change in government brought hope to many Congolese citizens. Willy Kaulu is a former child soldier who fought in that war that began in eastern DRC. He still has vivid memories of the battles they fought.
It was God who protected us in that conflict. I joined the war because I love my country. We used to motivate each other by singing, if 3 of our colleagues die and 2 remain, they should continue the struggle to overthrow the government.
But the change in government didn't result in the reforms that the new leader promised the population. Differences between former President Laurent Kabila and his foreign backers led to his assassination in January 2001 and the start of another war in eastern DRC. The current DRC president, Felix Tshisekedi, recently imposed a martial law in the east of the country to end the rebellions that are a legacy of the 2 major conflicts that occurred between 1996 and 2003. The ouster of former DRC President Mobutu Sese Seko in 1997 is widely seen as the start of democracy in the country, but hundreds of thousands of civilians died in that war. The conflict also gave rise to militia groups and criminal gangs who continue to terrorize civilians in eastern DRC. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
And coming up in your business news. Nigeria's inflation rate drops to 18.12% in April. And South Africa's special economic zones are struggling to boost the economy.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca. A among the crowds in Cairo
who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile, along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In your business news, Nigeria has recorded its first drop in headline inflation since the closure of land borders in 2019. The inflation rate stood at 18.12% in April. It represents a 0.05% decline when compared to 18.7% recorded in March 2021. On the other hand, the closely watched food inflation rate also decreased over April. It went down from 22.95% recorded in March to 22.72% in April. Now, this could indicate that inflation has reached its peak in March and could be on its way down. While staying with money matters in Nigeria, Diaspora remittances have dropped 27.7% to $16.8 billion in 2020. That's according to the World Bank. Despite the drop, the country is turning to these inflows to shore up its reserves and stabilize its exchange rate. The country's central bank has introduced a raft of measures to encourage more remittances. CGTN's Deji Badmus tells us more.
Nigeria has been battling a severe forex shortage for close to 2 years now. With a reduction in oil earnings as a result of the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, forex supply to the economy has been badly affected, forcing the central bank to carry out a series of devaluations to stabilize the exchange rate. The Apex Bank is now beginning to give diaspora remittances serious attention as a source of forex supply.
Before now, what we've seen is that we've only given a lot of I'll use the word prioritization to price of crude. When price goes up, we jubilate. When it comes down, we worry. And then two, we have constantly been looking at, anytime there's need for money, we look at what is direction of foreign direct investments and the rest of them. Whereas we pay less attention to diaspora remittances as well as export sector support.
The World Bank puts diaspora remittances to Nigeria last year at $16.8 billion. Some other estimates put it at $21 billion. Recently, the Central Bank of Nigeria introduced a number of measures to boost inflow of remittances. Recipients are now allowed to receive funds in foreign currencies and even get a 5 naira rebate on every dollar sent by Nigerians in the diaspora in what the CBN calls the Naira for Dollar scheme.
So it's facilitated and enable the rise of foreign currency inflows into the Nigerian economy. Also, let's not forget, in as much as that policy made a lot of sense, it is still not a fundamentally intelligent macroeconomic policy or monetary policy in the sense. And I'm saying this because that policy came right after the crypto ban.
The CBN says the policy is only a temporary measure to quickly harness the potentials of diaspora remittances and address Nigeria's chronic forex shortage. And thanks in part to the policy, diaspora remittances are projected to grow to about $22 billion by the end of this year.
We have also not created a structure around understanding the diaspora remittances market particularly, all right? And until we can also unlock potentials in that regard, I do not think one policy would effectively unlock it. It only increases inflow, and there is more than just inflow. There has to be a strategy to diaspora remittances. There has to be a broader economic plan or a broader economic strategy or institutional strategy on how we can use diaspora remittances better, all right, especially for infrastructural and capital expenditure and enabling economic growth and development than just into direct people's pocket.
Diaspora remittances have been a lifesaver for many Nigerians, and for a long time, the government simply ignored its potential as an important source of foreign exchange supply. But it is now taking it very seriously. So what the central bank does next to further harness its potential remains to be seen. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
South Africa currently has 11 special economic zones scattered around the country. However, their capacity to really make a difference to the country's economic growth prospects hasn't matched expectations. Angela Coppola has more.
The government has spent 20 years developing and implementing their special economic zone strategy.
The problem with it is that they have chosen the wrong model of SEZs. Instead of using them as a labor-intensive, export-oriented industrialization tool, they've used them as a regional development tool on capital-intensive industries where South Africa does not have a competitive advantage.
At the moment, South Africa's current proclaimed zones are very similar to the rest of the economy. Essentially, there are publicly financed industrial parks with some subsidized infrastructure and factory or office space.
Employment was one of the key drivers of the policy intervention. It hasn't succeeded. It's estimated that no more than 10,000 people are employed in those 11 zones. The proposal by the Centre for Development and Enterprise, the CDE, aims to change that.
The focus that the government of South Africa should have is labor-intensive industries with minimum amount of capital investment by government in, very expensive, sophisticated zones. It doesn't make sense. What is needed is to give massive amount of jobs to people who don't have jobs. And in essence, the CDE proposal is that.
The proposal calls for an experiment, focused attention on one special economic zone, and that's the Kruger zone in the Eastern Cape.
It would comply with basic health and safety standards, but it would allow individual factories to negotiate with their workers about piecework, about hours of work, and a range of other things. They would pay the national minimum wage, and we are requesting that the expanded tax incentive for first-time workers is expanded to all workers. All products coming out of the zone would be for export only.
What the city is proposing is to make sure that these industries that would locate in what are effectively export processing zones of the old type do not compete with the domestic market, local economy.
It's common cause that the special economic zone policy of government hasn't worked. It's now time for a new plan, and it's got to be enacted quickly. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Business leaders in Senegal have welcomed the ongoing France-Africa summit, which, among other things, is discussing ways to support small and medium-sized businesses in Africa. CGTN's Joy Kirukijuma reports.
Senegalese businesses are reeling from the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Among them is R&G Company, located in Dakar's Mamors district. The company specializes in the energy sector and employs more than 40 people. A manager with R&G views the France-Africa Summit as a boon for all African companies in difficulty.
I think it is the right time for the heads of state to go and discuss and take stock of the economic situation since March 2020 until now. They should discuss different points that could allow our companies to recover and gain competitiveness, because we have had a lot of trouble keeping our companies still in business. So we are asking for funding, assistance, coaching or follow-up after this summit. We are business leaders and we have employees that we have to pay in order for them to live decently. We hope that at the end of this summit we can find some constructive solutions that will allow us to continue working, because we need to work. Work must not stop and Africa needs to work.
With the devastating effects of COVID-19, Zainab Sangare, an economic analyst, insists African countries need massive long-term financing to recover and rebuild.
This France-Africa summit will allow companies in difficulty to rebound economically after this COVID-19 pandemic, because we are all witnesses of the damage of COVID-19 on Senegalese and African companies in particular. It must be admitted that many companies have been created in the digital field in Senegal in recent years. However, many of them have closed because they could not resist the effects of COVID-19. Today, Senegalese companies need special support more than ever. In order to rebound the companies, the national and international economy, it is necessary to collaborate and mutualize actions at this time. This is what is needed for everyone to see each other at the top of the economic curves.
According to the International Monetary Fund, Africa's financing needs are estimated at $400 billion. Many strategies to support the African continent are expected to be discussed at the summit. Among those to be explored include debt relief and cancellation. Joy Kirukijuma, CGTN.
Now, if every person in the UK were to stop wasting food for just a day, it would have the same effect on greenhouse gases as planting 500,000 trees. Food waste accounts for around 8% of carbon emissions, and at least some in the country are eyeing the role anaerobic digestion plants could play. Jemima Walker explains.
The saying goes, one man's trash is another man's treasure. And that's certainly true here.
By sending food waste to anaerobic digestion, you're preventing it going into a landfill site. So in a landfill site, the food will break down and the gas will be released to atmosphere. We're sending it here, we capture the gas and turn it into energy that people can use.
Here, 34,000 tonnes of food waste a year gets collected from local schools, businesses and homes. It's then depackaged in the food waste reception hall, which is a lot less smelly than it looks. It then gets heated up to make sure diseases are killed.
What kind of things are you protecting against?
Potentially harmful pathogens and bacteria such as E. coli or Salmonella.
The waste sits for 55 days and then gas is taken off the top.
So it really is just like a huge stomach in many ways.
In many ways, exactly. You've got to give it the right diet. If you give it too much salty things, that can harm the bacteria.
This room checks that the gas being processed is pure methane before it gets injected into the national grid. The food process at this plant generates enough power to power 2,500 local homes for a year.
This is what's left.
If you have a smell, it's not too smelly.
No, it doesn't actually smell.
It can be used as fertiliser by local farmers who call it rocket fuel.
I mean, it's very effective. It's 7 days and you can see where it's been applied. It really picks up the crops. In terms of, like, compared to pre-oiled fertiliser, it's tenfold in the sort of effectiveness, I suppose, or the response that you see in the crop.
Anaerobic digesters are eye-wateringly expensive to run and rely heavily on government subsidies. So while anaerobic digestion is an effective and circular way of dealing with food waste, government has to keep putting its hands in its pockets to make sure trash can turn to treasure. Jemima Walker, CGTN, Cheltenham.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Today marks International Museum Day, and one country whose museums have suffered due to a lack of tourism is Egypt. Yesterday, Kim now takes a look at how museums in the country are adapting to survive the tough times.
Like the whole tourism industry, museums here nearly closed down after the coronavirus pandemic hit Egypt in early 2020. But the government took several measures to ensure its museums are not forgotten.
The best thing the government has done is the virtual tour. You can enter the museum and take a full tour from your couch. It has made it easier for many people and made others even more desperate to come here when possible. So if you can't travel, then from an app on your mobile phone, laptop or desktop, you can visit the museum anytime.
The ones that attracted most attention amid the pandemic were the Egyptian Museum and the National Museum of Egyptian Civilizations. That's when 22 ancient Egyptian royal mummies were transported in a dazzling parade from the Egyptian Museum in Tahrir Square to the newly inaugurated National Museum of Egyptian Civilizations.
The Museum of Civilization has a very unique aspect. The Egyptian Museum is specialized in ancient Egyptian history. The Islamic Museum displays Islamic monuments. The Greco-Roman is about Greco-Roman times. As for the National Museum here, it's the only one that displays all civilizations in one place.
And the focal point is the Royal Mummies Hall. The 22 royal mummies' new home is designed as an ancient tomb with high-tech access to all details and history of each mummy. Officials say the museum is receiving an average of 1,000 visitors a day, an improvement on the 2020 numbers.
Museums in Egypt are not only places to display monuments, but have become educational institutions that teach children about history, raises awareness about antiquities and how to appreciate and view the monuments, not as stones but as valuable pieces of history and civilization. More Egyptians are visiting museums lately thanks to the Royal Mummies Parade that has created a public sense of pride, love and keenness to know more about one's history and civilization.
To attract foreign travelers as flights resume, officials are applying strict anti-COVID measures, are sanitizing museums daily and vaccinating employees. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
The National Museum of Namibia is one of the major landmarks of the Southern African nation. On display are photos from the country's colonial past and souvenirs from the War of Independence. In addition, there are displays showing the local cultures and indigenous art. And these, of course, are some of the reasons why the museum remains a popular attraction for local and international tourists, until, of course, COVID-19. Although measures have been put in place to protect visitors from the pandemic, the number of tourists at the museum has reduced to a mere trickle.
Number of visitors coming to the museum these days obviously has decreased because of the pandemic. It was a drastic drop because obviously people don't want to be out, so places of visitation are going to be limited. People are going to want to stay home and rather try to stay safe.
The COVID have hit us so bad. Seeing also that when the country was, the border was closed, Namibia has got a small population, not any other countries. And when we had everything closed, as I'm saying, we closed the institutions, we closed the exhibitions. We were having shift to come to the offices. Of course, those who are into the offices, you will have one working this day, the other one working. And as I'm saying, we even have reduced the researchers who are coming in our laboratories to come to the museum because it's a risk to us.
And coming up in sports. All the action from the inaugural Basketball Africa League in Rwanda.
Africa Live. Find your voice.